beautiful people. Okay, today we are talking about immigration in the late 1800s. And here are some questions that I want you to think about. What were the systemic problems facing American life? What did it mean for America to progress in the Progressive Era? The Progressive Era is named as the name that we give this period of time. There's also other names that we're going to talk about later. But in historically, the way that they viewed their time then was that it was progress, an era of progress. So what did that mean for them? It doesn't always actually mean that there's actual progress. There's a lot of issues in this era. And how and why did some progressive movements try to ameliorate these problems? Ameliorate means make better. Okay, so those are just some overall questions to think about as we move through. So let's get started. What we're going to be doing today is I have some slides, but it's heavy on work. This is a really good day in class if we were in class in person, because it would be heavy group work day. So what I'm going to do is this is not only part of your participation, but homework. So I'm going to kind of combine them as well. So this will give you the context and feed you into the assignments that will be due on Canvas. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so we have the context for the early 20th century, so late 19th century, early 20th century. And so one of the big contexts at the time is immigration. So I'm going to just read this and give you a little bit more information. More than 15 million immigrants arrived in the U.S. between 1900 and 1915. That amount is the total number of immigrants who had arrived in the previous 40 years combined. We essentially have an immigration boom in this time period. And again, that is important because especially white people in America were worried about this immigration boom. We can see that in the experience today as far as xenophobia is the fear of foreigners. And that time period, you can definitely see more Americans vocalizing that, of the fear that these foreigners were going to taint America, they were going to ruin it. And so what we'll find out is that manifested in legal problems, social problems, cultural problems, and even physical problems in which people are murdered because of this xenophobia. Okay, so 1910, 3/4 of New York City's population were recent immigrants or first-generation immigrants. So that is amazing. Even New York City today is still known as like a hub for immigration. But even in 1910, 3/4 of the city's population was immigrants. It was one of the first stops for immigrants coming from Europe because it was right on the water. And so we're going to look at Ellis Island, which was one of many immigration processing centers, but it was the major one for people coming from Europe. In this time period, immigrants are blamed for low wages. We saw a little bit of that when we first looked at Lowell Mill, which was the first factory in the U.S., the first textile factory. And so if you remember from that case study, it was mostly teenage women that were the first factory workers. And so what they do is they don't want to pay these women enough money anymore, and they want to charge them money for their board. So what they do is when these women start striking to demand higher wages, they bring in immigrants as strikebreakers. So the first group of immigrants that's really brought in as strikebreakers are the Irish, because of the potato famine that's going on then. By this point, we have many different types of immigrants that are coming in. Not just coming in voluntarily, like we do have that, but we also have corporations that are actively recruiting immigrants. One example of this is a picture that's on the right is the Henry Ford factory. And Henry Ford, who's considered we have a lot of great men in U.S. history, and many U.S. history classes are taught through these great men. I don't like to do that. But anyway, I think he's actually a really interesting study if you look at Henry Ford, because he wasn't just making a product and famous for making that product through the use of the assembly line and mastering how fast and efficient that you can produce something. But he was also known for specifically wanting to recruit workers that were immigrants because he wanted to assimilate them. He was very much interested in that his role as a progressive airman, that his form of progress that he was going to bring to America was that he was going to take these immigrants, assimilate them, meaning eliminate all of their sort of foreignness, and make them American. So as you see in the picture, I'm looking at my screen right here in case you're wondering why I'm pointing. As you see in the picture, this is one of those days. Well, actually, let me back up. So part of these immigrant workers, they not only were taught how to do the job, because they weren't recruited for any basic skills. They were just working on an assembly line. So they're not only taught how to do the job on the assembly line, but they also had to partake in these Americanization classes in which you would be taught Christianity, you would be taught English language, you'd be taught cultural etiquette, all different things in order to fit in food, cooking. And so part of your graduation from this assimilation class was that you would get into this giant pot. What you see here is this giant cauldron. And so the point of it was very performative because it was, again, you can see the audience. It was out in front of everyone. It was a huge celebration. What you do is you get into the pot in your old dress, whatever you arrived in America wearing. You get into the pot, change clothes into your new American outfit, and then you come out of the pot, and then everyone celebrates you. And so that's that would be the end celebratory event of your part of your training. This isn't just for European immigrants, although Henry Ford was definitely interested in assimilating European immigrants. In 1852, the Chinese made 25% of California's population. That's a good example of how corporations like mining factories, railroads especially, recruited the Chinese for these jobs, and specifically kept them on. Were not interested in assimilating them, but were interested in keeping them in like substandard living conditions, substandard working conditions, so that they wouldn't have to pay them anything, and they can just send them home after their contract was over. So that's the context for the early 20th century, is we have an immigration boom. Okay, so the next thing what I want you to do is part of this, your work today is going to be a quiz. And so the first thing you're going to need to do is watch this clip from the Golden Door. That's just going to be right after this. I'm going to go ahead and give you the questions that are on the quiz. What I need you to do is be specific about this clip. I don't want you to Google something. I want you to watch the clip and then give me all the answers to this are in the clip. Okay, so your questions. What are 3 different types of tests required during immigration at Ellis Island? What were these tests measuring and why? So the tests are in the clip. Don't Google it. Watch the clip and give me the tests from the clip. What do these tests reveal about the type of citizens the U.S. wanted Italians to be in modern America? To give you some context for the clip, what you see here is Ellis Island. So again, the major hub for European immigration in this time period. What you're looking at is how Italians are processed at Ellis Island. Interestingly enough, which surprises many people, is that in this time period, Italians were very denigrated as Italians, Southern Europeans, Eastern Europeans. These were denigrated as like the bad Europeans, the sort of lowly, very hard to assimilate, oftentimes coming from poorer places. And so what you see here is a sort of example of how Italians are being processed at Ellis Island. Pay attention to what kind of tests they go through. Also in the film, what you'll see is there's a British woman. Keep in mind, she should not be there. use her in the film. She's being used as a sort of comparison of like how a British person might be treated very differently than an Italian. So pay attention to how they treat them versus how they treat her, and how also they treat her as suspect because she's writing with Italians. In this time period, imagine like segregation and racism that way is completely legal. So you have a completely like Italian ship, you have a completely British ship. They would be processed in very different ways. So the only reason why she is suspect is because she's arriving with Italians. So in historically, she would not have been. So just put her here as a case study for how you would be comparing both of them. Okay, so we're going to show that clip. Then you will answer the questions on the quiz. I don't have the quiz timed, so that way you can be able to go back and forth as need be. Okay, let's stop.
Ancora. Tira fuori la leva. Più. Da un lato. Più fuori, dai. Vieni. Bravo. Vieni e gira. Tongue out. Breathe in. Più grande. Esci fuori la lingua. Più fuori. Più fuori.
Have you been ill?
Sei stato malato?
Can he speak?
Sai parlare?
Have you been ill? Can you speak? Can you hear me? Can you hear me what
Sai
I'm saying?
parlare? Perché non rispondi?
Chisto, me figlio è Chisto, me figlio è.
Non puoi convincerlo di che parli?
È una parola, c'è una testatura, però a vedere come travaglia, Chisto mi chiudo un mulo Levati sti causi, pe. Levati sti causi, pe.
Ti volevo fare queste cause. Ah, non dai!
Tu non ci dai queste cose, a tuo frate. Pe.
Che fai?
Pe. Non ti scantare.
Stand like this.
Un picciotto viaggiò, cose, senti...
Follow me this way.
No, ora si leva, ora si leva, ora si leva, ora si leva.
Devi andare dall'altra parte. Andiamo.
Ora si leva, me figlio con mio. Ma smette, mio figlio va a stare con mio.
Va bene,
Che è sta cosa?
Dai, devi ritornare, dai, vieni.
Ci dici che è mio figlio.
Puoi venire qua che dobbiamo fare
Ma che ispezione, ispezione?
Vieni qui.
Non ti scantare, pe. Ma ci dici che è mio figlio.
Vieni.
Will you please lie down?
Si stenda di fianco, signora.
Signora, si deve sdraiare di fianco. Così, con la testa qua. Così.
Chi sta combinando? Massima di due. Ah, se massima di due, chi sta combinando?
Tranquilla, signora, è una visita normale.
Se ne levate in gioco! Un po' che sta toccata, nudo!
Excuse me, madam. This lady is not used to this kind of examination.
Are you English, miss?
Yes, I am.
You came with Italians?
Yes, madam.
Is your husband traveling with you?
My fiancé, he's supposed to meet me here.
It is highly uncommon for an English lady to be traveling with Italians. You'll be questioned about that.
Non avere paura, hai tempo, eh? Pensa bene a quello che fai.
Math test.
Quante gambe ha un cavallo?
4.
E quante gambe ha un cavallo più una gallina?
4 e 2.
4 and 2. Che fanno?
Camminano.
No. Quante gambe vedi in totale? Quante gambe hanno un maiale, una gallina e una capra?
Ok.
Va bene. Uè. Va bene.
Caccia a casa. E qua si possono asciugare cose o potremmo pure fare l'armadio. Ci potremmo mettere l'armadio.
Very good.
Allora, lei è in mezzo al mare, in una piccola barca. C'è una grande tempesta. Nella barca con lei ci sono 2 sacchi. Uno è un sacco pieno di pane e l'altro è un sacco pieno di oro. Tu ti devi salvare. Quale sacco butti?
Ma perché a tirare questi sacchi? Io faccio... Etto l'oro, un pozzettare l'oro.
He says he can't throw the gold.
Un pane e un mangio.
He'd eat the bread.
Ah, un ghetto niente. Un ghetto niente.
Nothing. He wouldn't throw anything.
Giusto?
Okay.
Giusto, vero?
I'm ready. Done. I love table games. May I ask, I thought you were looking for illnesses and contagious diseases here.
Unfortunately, ma'am, it has been scientifically proven that lack of intelligence is genetically inherited, hence contagious, in a way. We are trying to prevent below-average people from mixing with our citizens.
What a modern vision.
Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, you know how I feel. Blossom on the tree, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good. Dragonfly out in the sun, you know what I mean, don't you know? Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean? Sleep in peace when day is done, that's what I mean. And this old world is a new world and a bold world for me. Stars, when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me.
Adesso facciamo un esercizio. Io ti darò degli ordini e tu devi eseguirli nell'ordine in cui io te li ho dati. Apri la porta e metti la sedia vicino alla porta. devi spostare le cose nell'ordine in cui io te lo chiedo. Prima apri la porta e poi sposti la sedia. Hai sbagliato. Ti ho chiesto di aprire la porta e poi portare la sedia vicino alla porta. Ricomincia. Ecco, bravo. Adesso apri la porta. Metti la sedia vicino alla porta. Prendi il libro e poggialo per terra.
Okay, great. So you've just watched the clip from Ellis Island. The next clip that you're going to watch is on the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it's very important because while there are, and we'll learn a little bit more specifically, while there are regulations on immigration, the Chinese Exclusion Act is historically significant because it specifically targets one race, one nationality of exclusion out of immigration. So instead of being like all Europeans or all Asians, the Chinese Exclusion Act in its name saying specifically we do not want the Chinese as part of American culture. And that is due to racism. So watch this clip on the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then we'll jump into how their experience processing the Chinese at Angel Island was a little bit different than Ellis Island.
On June 30th, 1885, as the fundraising campaign for the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty finally began to pick up speed, a letter appeared in the pages of the New York Sun. Written by a young Chinese immigrant and recent college graduate named Samsung Bo, who had come to America years earlier as a small boy and who dreamed of becoming a lawyer.
Sir, a paper was presented to me yesterday for subscription among my countrymen toward the pedestal fund of the Statue of Liberty. My countrymen and myself are honored in being thus appealed to as citizens in the cause of liberty. But the word liberty makes me think of the fact that this country is the land of liberty for all men of all nations, except the Chinese. That statue represents liberty holding a torch, which lights the passage of those of all nations who come into this country. But are the Chinese allowed to come? Are the Chinese here allowed to enjoy liberty as men of all other nationalities enjoy it? Free from the insults, abuse, assaults, wrongs, and injuries from which men of other nationalities are free. By the law of this nation, a Chinaman cannot become a citizen. Whether this statute against the Chinese or the Statue of Liberty will be the more lasting monument. to tell future ages of the liberty and greatness of this country will be known only to future generations. Samsungbo.
The solitary arm of the unfinished Statue of Liberty had languished on Madison Square in New York for more than 5 years, when on May 6, 1882, on the eve of the greatest wave of immigration in American history, President Chester A. Arthur signed into law an extraordinary piece of federal legislation. It was called the Chinese Exclusion Act, and it was unlike any law enacted since the founding of the Republic. Singling out as never before a specific race and nationality for exclusion, it made it illegal for Chinese workers to come to America, and for Chinese nationals already here ever to become citizens of the United States. Fueled by deep-seated tensions over race and class and national identity that had been festering since the founding of the Republic, it was the first in a long line of acts targeting the Chinese for exclusion, and it would remain in force for more than 60 years. It continues to shape the debate about what it means to be an American to this day.
Chinese Americans always have this identification with the founding principle of this country, so beautifully laid out by the founding fathers, and so eloquently articulated in the Declaration of Independence and in American Constitution. The Chinese identify with this fundamental principle of liberty, equality, and justice for all. And all men are created equal. Now, how can you say that this is a group of people who are biologically and culturally unfit to live a civilized life, to appreciate and practice American culture, political and religious ideals? That's why I think a lot of Americans had a hard time to learn that the Chinese Exclusion Act really exists for 60 years. They couldn't believe it. The government did that.
We have to remember that for most of the 19th century, immigration into the United States was basically open. You just showed up. So the Chinese exclusion law is one of the first really comprehensively restrictive laws. And it's also the first and only time in the entire history of the United States that a group is singled out by name, Chinese, by name, as being undesirable. So this is truly a remarkable moment.
Starting in California, the Chinese were marked as different. And I see the 1882 bill as a link in a chain of bills and a chain of legislation and race riots and purges that are trying to move the country toward ethnic cleansing. The 1882 bill was not about labor. I think it was about white purity. And how do we get rid of people who are different?
Many people think of this exclusion law as being very racist, very unfair. But if you look at the world at that time, every country was like that, and almost every ethnicity. Try to be a citizen of China or try to be a citizen of Japan is impossible unless you're ethnically Chinese or Japanese. But this is a group of people, Chinese American, the Chinese that were here, who actually fought back and made America better than what it was. and help make America what it is today, the values that we have, including equal protection under the law, rights to education, what it means to be American, what makes you American, to be born here. All these weren't defined.
The 1882 exclusion law has been forgotten, but once we remember it, it is outrageous. And it's probably why we've forgotten it, because it is so outrageous. Many Americans today cannot believe this happened. How could this country, in its culture, in its politics, in its economics, do what it did against a whole class of people? The exclusion law said that whole race of people are banned from this country. So it's a racial exclusion law. So that banning of a whole category of people directly challenges foundational questions of what American freedom means and what American history means, who we the people can constitute.
I think it's essential that Americans know about the exclusion of Chinese, not because it's the Chinese, but because it reflects how America has come to develop, how America saw itself at one time, and how it continues to see itself. It has much to do with the character of our national history, and that, to me, is the most important thing in understanding how we became who we are today. Some of it has to do with the fact that we excluded Chinese for 60 years.
Great. So the next thing that we're going to do is you're going to be reading about, reading from the perspective of Chinese immigrants who came through Angel Island. So again, I always say this, I need a map. So if this is the US, and this is the West, and this is the East, the reason why European immigrants are coming here to Ellis Island is because Europe is right here. So it's just a straight shot. Europeans wouldn't come through California. The reason why the Chinese are coming in through California is because, again, it's actually not as close as Europe, but China is right here. So Angel Island is in California. Ellis Island is in New York. We also have many other immigration processing centers. For example, in Texas, there's one for Mexican immigrants. So there's other ones as well. However, Angel Island is a very different experience than one at Ellis Island, in which, if you notice from the clip, Ellis Island, how, if you didn't know, you're in and out in one day. About the average time that you're at Ellis Island is about 6 hours. And they are processing millions of people. So it's really high capacity. If you notice, like, it's a beautiful building. You can actually still go visit it. I wish we could do a trip to New York City and we could go visit it. But it's a beautiful building. It's meant to be quick. They're doing quick tests. They're really just trying to catch some part of the progressive era is about focusing on bettering America. What we're going to find out is that in this time period, they're very much interested in a practice of eugenics. Eugenics is the political practice, political, medical, social, cultural practice of eliminating lesser genetics from the gene pool. In this time period, it's absolutely focused on white people. And so what they want to do, part of that eugenics, and again, this is completely legal, is we want to sterilize poorer people. We want to sterilize non-white people. We want to prevent them from marrying. We want to keep worser immigrants out of the country. These are all eugenics practices, okay? So in Angel Island, while in Ellis Island, maybe you were there like 6 hours, in Angel Island, the average is like weeks, months. Some people were there even years because they ask them way questions. While at Ellis Island, they're really interested in doing those quick checks of mental health, physical health, and whatnot. In Angel Island, what they wanted to do is prove that you were who you said you were. What they would do is because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, you could not enter unless you could prove that you were richer, that you had property, especially if you were a woman. That if you were a woman, it was automatically assumed because of racism that you were a prostitute. And so therefore, the only women that were entering were wives. And so therefore, you might be at the Immigration Processing Center for weeks, for months, just to confirm that you were married to the person that you said you were. Extremely rigorous. You can also see, if you Google images of what Angel Island looked like, instead of the beautiful building that you see at Ellis Island, you have like chain link fences, metal, people all in bunk rooms because you're staying there for weeks. And so what happens is that people are there so long and they are so sad that they start carving into the walls poetry to just sort of capture their feelings. And what you, in this exercise that you're going to do, is you're going to read a couple poems. So there are 4 pages. Just choose one page. Definitely don't read them all, because how I would normally do it is put you into groups and just you guys would all read different different poems. So just choose one page. They're all different. Each page is different, but it has the same basic information at the top and 2 different poems. So you get to choose whichever ones you want. The question is always the same for all of them. This is a primary source written by a Chinese immigrant and translated. Describe the specific feelings of these different authors in both poems. How might they be feeling about the U.S. and their home? What evidence from the poem can you use to support your argument? So again, choose one page, any of the 4 pages, read those 2 poems, and you're going to be specific. Always the suggestion I give is be specific. So don't just be like, they're sad. Tell me, where did you see that they were sad? How sad? What are they sad about? Blah, 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 blah. Okay? So that is your Angel Island poetry exercise. And let me get back. Okay, so we also have the normalization of hate and violence. In this time period, we have historically, we have more than 4,700 lynchings. More than 3,400 of them are specifically African Americans. What I want you to do for your next assignment as part of your quiz is to go to this website. It's linked in the quiz, called Monroe Work Today. I'm going to pull this up. Okay. And what I want you to do is just take time, take about half an hour and go through the website. So once you get there, it's going to give you some basic overviews on lynchings. Lynching is if you've never heard of that term, it is, actually, no, you're going to tell me what lynching is. I'm not going to tell you. Because that's going to be part of your quiz questions. Your quiz questions that are related to this website. So again, don't Google the question. Use this website to answer these questions, because I want you to be specific about this website. So it says, the questions are, according to this website, what was lynching? You're going to tell me, find the answers on this website. What made someone a victim of lynching? What excuses were used to lynch victims? Where did the vast majority of lynchings occur in America? While the vast majority of victims were African American, other races were lynched too. Find an example of each one of these: an Italian, Native American, Chinese, and Mexican victim of lynching, and tell me why they were lynched. Okay? And you can't just be like, because white people are racist. Tell me the reasons that were provided as far as why they were lynched. What's the context? What I think you'll find interesting, even though this is really horrible to be looking at a map of how many people were murdered in this time period, I think what you'll find that's interesting is that there are absurd reasons that are given for lynching people, but there are also, what you'll find is in the context. Like a lot of times it's not about like an individual, I shouldn't say a lot of times. In many cases, it's not about an individual hatred or fear of one person. Sometimes you'll see that there's massive riots, mob violence, in which large groups of people, like large groups of workers, for example, like Chinese railroad workers or Chinese miners that are lynched. So it's not just racism, but racism is connected with fears of union organizing or fears of workers' rights, okay? So this is important. So that'll be your quiz question. So we also have, what you're going to see here is that, and I can actually help you out a little bit. You can actually find these examples of anti-Italianism in the map, the driving out period of the Chinese, and that other Wounded Knee Massacre. Actually, I don't know if the Wounded Knee Massacre, no, because it's, well, no, I don't think so. But anyway, you'll find anti-Italianism and the driving out period. So you have anti-Italianism, March 14th, 1891. In New Orleans, there's lynchings of 11 Italian Americans. We also have the driving out period of the Chinese is essentially like right after the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. You have these massive, it's called the driving out because it's literally like socially sanctioned murders of Chinese people. There's a couple of examples. Rock Springs Massacre in 1885, in which white miners killed 28 Chinese miners. Hell's Canyon Massacre in 1887, more than 30 Chinese miners shot and were shot and thrown downstream. In addition, we also have racism against Native Americans, because again, we never like approve them as Americans, which is what you would have found in your podcast. So the Wounded Knee Massacre is really important because it is in 1890, and it is when U.S. troops use the Hotchkiss guns, which if you Google it, it's really like an old school machine gun, but it can fire rounds. Actually, let me Google that. I always know this fact. Let's see. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm glad I looked this up because I was going to get the math wrong. A Hotchkiss gun is a machine gun. It could fire at the rate of 450 to 500 rounds per minute, okay? So this is important because that's the weapon that U.S. troops use to kill about 300 Lakota people. Lakota is a Native American nation. And so really there's no good reason why they do this. What happens, the Wounded Knee Massacre is started because these Lakota people are starving to death. And what happens is, in a lot of times in this time period, what you find is that Native Americans are forcibly removed off of their land and moved onto reservations. They're told that they're going to be given food or money for their land once they arrive to this reservation. And oftentimes what they find is that A, they're not given food, they're given substandard food, if anything at all, or they're told that like, oh yeah, we don't have that money yet, we'll give it to you in a few years, or we'll give you in later. So what happens is, in this situation, these people are starving and they're hungry and they've been forced onto this reservation, which can't produce, like oftentimes reservations are on the worst land because they're moved off their land because they find out that it has something that Americans wanted, like coal, like they want to mine something, they want to grow something on it, they want a cattle farm, so they move them off to these crappier parts of land. And so anyway, so they're there, they're on this reservation, they're starving, and so they decide that they are going to do this dance. It's literally dancing to try and like rally the people, connect with spiritually with their ancestors, with their gods. And so white people in the town see them dancing and they get scared. Literally, this is the reason why this massacre happens. White people get scared of the dancing. And so they decide they're going to call U.S. troops to come in because they're worried that the dancing means that Native Americans are going to attack the white people. So what happens is they call U.S. troops, and when do the U.S. troops come in? They don't go like, hey, why are you dancing? White people are scared. What they do is they come in and murder them all, okay? So this is important because this massacre in 1890 is seen, it's talked about in the press, as it's seen as the end of the American frontier because it's described as the last Native American resistance to American expansion. It's seen as like, this was the last big massacre, so now we've conquered the Native Americans. We've killed them all, we've pushed them out, we've made it all the way to the West Coast. Now, how, as Americans, are we going to define ourselves? If this has been the way for the past 100 years that America has been defining itself as opposition to Native Americans and conquering of this frontier, once we've conquered it all, what do we do? And the hint for the next class period is that we keep moving further, okay? Also, it's just talked about this way that Native Americans are conquered in like popular culture. It does not, like, there are in no stretch of the imagination are Native Americans gone. They are still living. There are thousands and thousands of them in this time period. Like, don't, hundreds of thousands, like, don't by any sense think that they don't exist. It's just the way that Americans were talking about it as if they no longer existed, which speaks a little bit about racism in that time period. Okay, so another example is in what you can see here is that on the left, what you have is that also Irish, because again, Irish are not seen as white. Up and before the Civil War, really up before like the 1880s, the Irish are not seen as white. They're seen as like a lesser group. And many of the images that you'll see is, like this image on the left is a political cartoon in which the Irish were physically characterized in the same way derogatory traits that would be given to African Americans. So what you'll see are like larger features to compare them to apes. You'll look ape-like. They were seen as drunken, disorderly, stupid, fat, out of control. Every bad stereotype that you can give someone, they were applied to all of these races. Black, Irish, Italian, whatnot. On the right, what you'll see is that it's not just a fear that they're bad. Like the Chinese were treated, and Asians largely, but especially the Chinese, were treated in a different way than Irish, Black, and whatnot. Italians, Germans, because all of those racist stereotypes still apply. In many ways, they're characterized in the same way. Drunk, disorderly, prostitutes, drug users, not smart, untrustworthy. I mean, every stereotype, even many of the same physical features, monkey-like, terrible things. However, what the fear is that it's not just that they're bad, it's that they're going to take over. And what you'll see in this image is that on the left is supposed to be an Irish person, and on the right is supposed to be a Chinese person. And you can see behind them is this map of the U.S. It's supposed to be a map of the U.S. If you didn't know, they are eating Uncle Sam, who in this time period is a really famous icon. He's used in popular culture too as a sort of representative of America. I don't know why I should probably study that, of like how he comes about. But when you see him, he's a stand-in for America. So what you see is the Irish man is eating his head and the Chinese man is eating his feet, and they're eating it together, meaning they're just going to consume America. It's this fear that all these Irish immigrants, all these Chinese immigrants, they're going to overrun, they're going to overtake America. The fear, though, is that eventually the Chinese will overrun everyone. And so this fear is called yellow peril. It's this racist fear that we have to keep out the Chinese because they will take over everything. They're not just going to be bad immigrants. They're going to, like, kill us all. So here are some it's important legislation on immigration. You have, as we've already seen, the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 is the first law to single out an immigrant group by name. The 1921 Emergency Quota Act, it restricted immigration to 3% of foreign-born persons of each nationality that resided in the United States in 1910. What's important about this is that here, what you can see is that in 1921, what people in the 20s are thinking is that they're like, we don't like these new immigrants. We don't like these immigrants from Eastern Europe. We don't like these immigrants from Asia. What we want to do is go back in time. What immigrants were coming in 1910, and we want to restrict immigration to 3% of any nationality that resided in the United States in 1910. So we only want people that were already here in 1910, 3% of that country could come in. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. But instead of being like any nationality can come in now and we're only going to allow 3% from them, instead what we want to do is be like, no. Who lived here in 1910? We're only going to allow in those people. We don't want these new people. In 1924, they doubled down. They're like, oh yeah, we like that. We're going to go even harder on that. So what they have is they implemented a national origins formula using the 1890 census. They're like, no. We don't want to just go back to 1910. We want to go back to 1890. And we want to figure out who was living here then in 1890. And those are the only people we want to allow in, okay? What happens is that what you'll find is that drastically shifts the percentage. So for example, Italians are one of the new big immigrants. In 1890, there wasn't so many Italians coming in as in like 1924, way more Italians. So like one of the biggest immigration waves that's coming in the 1920s. So when we do the national origins formula, if we go back to 1890, 30 years ago, and we use that as a standard for who we're going to allow in, that cuts Italian immigration by 90% because we want to construct a whiter America. That was literally what they wanted to do. Fear of yellow peril, again, that really racist fear of Chinese people. It meant that as part of the Immigration Act of 1924, it bans nearly all immigration from Asia. Okay? There's no limits on people from North and South America, but it bans all immigration from Asia. It lasts until 1965. This is very, very important because this has impacted how we view America today. Still, white people in America today are seeing Asians, are seeing Africans, are seeing Mexican, South Americans as new immigrants. And this is only because part of this legislation, constructed Americans and constructed the idea that these people are new immigrants, when in fact they were not. Literally banning certain countries and not banning other ones, okay? So this is very important. The last thing I want to leave you with is at the same time that we're having fears of immigration, we also have the forced assimilation of immigrants and natives. So again, we saw that with the Henry Ford factory of his maniacal interest in assimilating immigrants. We do the same thing with Native Americans, in which we kick them off their land, force them onto reservations, starve them to death, murder them, but also we take their children from them, again, completely legal to do this, take their children from them and send them across the country to these boarding schools without the parents' consent. An example of this is the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Excuse me, a Carlisle Indian Industrial School. And the whole point of this school was to assimilate Native Americans. And their school motto, which is freaking terrible, is kill the Indian and save the man. Part of the school, there are many of these boarding schools, but here's some of the things that they did to assimilate them. They banned native languages. So imagine if the only language that you can speak is Choctaw, Lakota, whatnot. And then you get taken from your family and put in this boarding school in a completely different environment. And you're not allowed to speak the only language that you can speak. You're forced to work to be taught subservience. You have solitary confinement for children. Like, these are for children. Solitary confinement, corporal punishment, which means like physical violence, is completely legal and used on these children. Instead, you're taught that you don't have a history. Your Native American history, whatever that was, is gone. Instead, you're taught a European standard of education, and you're forced to go to church. And what happens is that these children are here for many years, and then eventually they leave and they go back home, and many of them can't speak their own languages, aren't even able to communicate with their families, especially grandparents. It like severs many of these Native American communities because their children are taken away from them, totally transformed into different people. You bring them back and they can't even communicate with their own family. So it dramatically changes these communities. Part of your quiz question is in response to these set of images, okay? So you have Carlisle Indian School. One thing that they did, which is kind of perverse, but I'm actually glad that we have these images so we can go and look at them now. What they would do is they would do before and after shots. And so what you see here is this group of kids before, when they first got there, and their after shot of when they've been there. I believe it's a year or two. Some are longer. But anyway, your question is, if the goal was to kill the Indian and save the man, how did this set of before and after photos prove that the Carlisle Indian School was successful? Because the Carlisle Indian School took these before and after photos and showed them off as like, look how amazing we are. Look what we did. We're awesome. And most white Americans were like, awesome. Way to go. Super cool. So how did this set of before and after pictures prove that the Carlisle Indian School was successful? What did they kill? If this set of photos shows us that they killed the Indian and saved the man, what did they kill and what did they save? And be specific about this image, okay? Cool, and that is all we have for today. So next class, I believe, is going to be more lecture. I'm trying to do the lectures recorded just because I don't want to see you sleeping in class. So you can sleep on your own. So that's all for today. I will see you in the next video lecture, likely. And then I will, I'm back on office hours this week. So if you want to meet up, chat about stuff, I'm here on campus. But otherwise, I will see you soon. Bye, guys.